In this video we are going to see the anatomical position and the anatomical planes and axes. When we start talking about anatomy, we need references to know which part of the body we are referring to in a precise and unambiguous way. Because humans can adopt different body positions, it is necessary to look for a unique position in order to describe their anatomy. Once this unique position has been defined, we can locate each of the parts of the body. This position requires several conditions, which I am going to list for you. You have to stand upright. The head must be erect and not tilted. Eyes open, looking straight ahead and at the same level. The arms must be extended to the sides of the body with the palms of the hands facing forward. The legs should be extended and together. And the feet should be parallel. This is not a normal position, it is only a starting point for describing the movement of the human body. This reference position is called anatomical position. Now we are going to establish three imaginary planes, perpendicular to each other, which will section the body into different parts to facilitate its study. This one here is the frontal or coronal plane. This one is the transverse or horizontal plane. And this last one is the sagittal or anteroposterior plane. Let's go to the frontal plane. It divides the body into anterior half and posterior half. It is the plane in which the visible movements of the face are made. A movement in the frontal plane that moves a region of the body towards the midline of the trunk is called adduction. For example, hip adduction. You see how the hip joint brings the leg inwards towards the midline of the trunk. When the movement that is made in the frontal plane moves a region of the body away from the midline of the trunk, it is called abduction. For example, abduction of the shoulder. You see how the shoulder joint pulls the arm outward, away from the midline of the trunk. As a mnemonic rule you can remember, adduction can be adding to the body and abduction can be away from the body. When referring to the neck and trunk, a movement in the frontal plane is called a lateral tilt. For example, this is a right lateral tilt. For the fingers of the hand, the midline of the body is replaced by the axis of the hand passing through the third finger. In this example, the abduction of the fifth finger is away from the axis of the hand, but not away from the midline of the body. For the feet, the midline of the body is also replaced by the axis of the foot passing through the second toe. In this example, the abduction of the first toe moves away from the axis of the foot, but not from the midline of the body. We now move on to the transverse plane. This plane divides the body into the upper and lower body. It is in this plane that the movements of external and internal rotation take place. External rotation is an outward movement around a vertical or longitudinal axis. In this example, you can see how Felipe makes an external rotation of the hip. Internal rotation is an inward movement around the same vertical or longitudinal axis. And in this other example, you see how Felipe performs an internal rotation of the shoulder. In the case of the elbow joint, the rotations are done with the elbow flexed and the movements are supination and pronation for the forearm. As a mnemonic rule you can remember, supination is to turn your arm palm up, as if you are holding a bowl of soup. Pronation is to turn your arm with the palm down, as if you are pouring out whatever is in your bowl. As for the trunk and neck, rotations are made to the right or to the left. and that leaves the sagittal plane. This is the plane that divides the body into right half and left half. In this plane, flexion and extension movements take place. You will see that any plane parallel to this one is called the sagittal plane. Flexion is the bending of a joint so that the bones that form that joint are pulled closer. For example, hip flexion. Another example is dorsal ankle flexion. In the case of the shoulder, it is called antepulsion. The opposite happens in the extension movement. The angle between two bones increases. For example, extension of the head. In the case of the shoulder, it is called retropulsion. And we finish this lesson by looking at the axes, which will also help us to have references to study the human body. The anteroposterior axis goes from back to front. It is formed by the intersection of the sagittal and transverse planes. It guides the movements of adduction and abduction. You see that it is as if this axis and its parallels were a toothpick that you have inserted, and around which these rotations are carried out. The transverse axis runs from one side to the other. It is formed by the intersection of the transverse and frontal planes. It guides the flexion and extension movements. Finally, the longitudinal axis runs from top to bottom. It is formed by the intersection of the frontal and sagittal planes. It guides the movements of internal rotation and external rotation. Here we have flexed the elbow so that you can see it better. You can see how there is an internal rotation of the shoulders and legs, and then an external rotation of the shoulders and legs.